maybe that doesn't mean a lot to me, maybe that wouldn't mean a lot to you, but to a person that maybe has never had someone say, okay, you're doing the right thing, good job. When we started debating incentives and sanctions, in the drug court setting, incentives are small things like bus pass, $10 gift certificate to Burger King. It's not a new car, I can tell you that. And so there's very small things, but and you're supposed to give incentives 2 to 3 times as many times as you give a sanction. And so we had to build in things, and court service officers now have to build in and be reminded that you need to give them incentives as well. And whether that's a phone call, whether that's saying, you've been doing great, we're going to take your UAs from 3 times a week to 2 times a week. There's small things that we can do, but I think those all add up. And so that kind of underlined a lot of this. The other area in here, and I tried to skip it, but I did, financial accountability system. PJS is vested with the responsibility of coming up with a way of dealing with people that owe a lot of money. There's about $90 million owed to either the state or victims of crimes that we've never collected. And that's just what we have on computer records, which in some counties only go back to 2001. And so there's a lot of money out there. And what we are finding, and this is very true, you may have seen it, you have someone on probation, they're entirely successful, they're doing great, they make minimum wage, they pay $25 a month, and they keep paying and they keep paying, but the restitution is into the tens of thousands. Well, a lot of times, we would just extend their probation for the pure reason of collecting money. Well, court service officer time is valuable. Those are very highly trained, specialized people. They're not collection agents. And so to have them focusing their resource on collecting money, was viewed as a waste of their time, really. And so the goal here is to have a system that deals with financials and peel off those people that the only thing that they have left is financial obligations, and put them into a system where there's still oversight. So that's why we were afraid to let them go. As soon as we stop, as soon as they know I'm not watching to see if they make that payment in the clerk's office, they're going to stop. So we need something to watch them, but it doesn't need to be a court service office. So we're in the process of developing this. This is very unique because it also reaches out and grabs those parolees that are coming out of the penitentiary and putting them under this UJS system. Because parole has the same issue, trying to collect restitution. When you think of some people will always be paying restitution. The individual that burned down the courthouse in Corson County, somewhere between $2 and $4 million, that's not going to get paid anytime soon. But a lot of people owe smaller amounts. Some people, in the Second Circuit here, we have something called case service monitoring. These are your class 1 misdemeanors. Maybe they owe $2,000 in medical bills from that bar fight. Well, we want to supervise them somehow, so we've kind of created this case service monitoring category that we use. Those are going to be the ideal people that go into this kind of system, because that's all we're doing is trying to monitor the payments. So it's really meant to peel off people as often as we can, because again, focus on the high risk, high needs, and it's not people that we're just monitoring for payments.
Thanks, Greg. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, mostly because we've only got about 30 minutes left, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions so you can grill Greg on tough issues. Many of you are more familiar with all of these changes in the code than I am, because since we did it, I haven't had to stand in front of a judge or charge out a case or defend a case. From what I hear, generally things are going pretty well in terms of the charges. I do hear from different parts of the state what Joe talked about, that now that there's a separate offense for internal possession in some places, it's charged out twice. What I asked a couple of my friends out west was, well, are you pleading to both of them? And I haven't found anybody that's pleading folks to both. So that's good to hear. I was hoping we didn't have to have a class for the defense attorneys. But this third bullet is one I really want to talk about, because it's probably the most unique. As you know, the 180-day sanction that a judge can use in like a suspended imp environment, we heard from the judges on the work group that a lot of times they would start with almost a use of that 180 days. And the legislature put into code that judges should start with only 60 days. The legislature made a statement of public policy that says judges in these cases, you should just start by using 60 days, not use any more than that, because now we have this graduated sanctioning grid, and if you start with 180, you're going to lose your authority to use this sanctioning grid. That was the intent behind that. I can tell you it was debated hotly and heavily with the judges. They didn't necessarily love the legislature telling them that. That's probably why it's not mandatory, but it's a public policy statement that that's what they should start with. What's that? Sure.
And I'll be quick.
Okay.
And I won't even talk about probation first. Under the controlled substances, there was a lot of debate about the misprision of a felony statute, and the fact that South Dakota is the only state that makes possession internally felony. And so the give and take on that was, we'll make it a misdemeanor, and then we don't have to report it as a court service officer or a parole agent when I UA someone and get a dirty UA. You put me in a pretty tough situation. The person's picking up a new number. Some state attorneys are charging that out. These could be drug court clients that now just picked up a new felony because they agreed to this more intense supervision. We expect them to fail to a certain extent, and once they do, you charge them out, got a new felony, great. That would really help that person. And so a lot of debate about that. The way it was eventually resolved was the misprison statute doesn't apply essentially to those dirty UAs that a probation officer would have, so there's no report requirement. They could if they wanted to, but there's no requirement. That was a tension that we had run into with our probation department and state attorneys, and that really resolved that and cleared up an issue that had been debated. And one of the few times I get up here in court on a motion to try to help someone suppress some evidence. And then presumptive probation for 5s and 6s. Pretty simple, presumptive probation. The Supreme Court last month handed down a case on presumptive probation, State versus Hernandez. Essentially, a DUI person, I think it was on their 5th and 5th DUI, Judge Garion said, well, I'm going to send them to the penitentiary. Their history of repeated DUIs, history of unsuccessful treatment, they haven't been really honest with me on some of the reasons why treatment isn't working, and didn't really buy some of the information that the defendant had been providing, it sounded like, in the opinion. And then the fact that the person had previously failed to show up for a few sentencing hearings didn't help. And so that's the only case we have on presumptive probation. We'll probably get more guidance on that as it goes through the process, but I think, and I'll just mention real briefly in 180 days, I think our judges have bought into that concept. The place where I hear that they're deviating from that is if they think they need to hold them in county jail longer while they're waiting to get a bed in treatment out of public safety concerns. If they think, I can't get somebody in for 80 days, then they're going to kind of deviate up from the 60. That's what I hear. You probably have a much better feel for that than I do.
Thanks, Greg. That was a great point. That was something I wanted to talk about. Just stay on that page just for a second, Greg. A lot of you and I had long conversations last year about the elimination of preliminary hearings to Class 1 misdemeanors. We had that same conversation with county officials, with the Attorney General's office, with the prosecutors. You can imagine if you're a county commissioner in one of those rural counties and we're telling you that, oh yeah, this great new idea that's coming from here is going to put a lot more people on probation. And right now, you drive 100 miles to take one of your sheriff drives 100 miles to take one of your inmates to jail. And yes, it's going to cost you more money to have more people in the community on probation. The presumptive probation, the tiered drug statute debate, the 60, 180 days, The preliminary hearings, it really, as you might imagine, you've settled a lot of cases, it really came down to a settlement, trying to figure out how each group could get a certain number of things and could get the program as far along as we could, move the ball down the field. It didn't go as far as some wanted. Some wanted weight-based controlled substances. The prosecutors and the Attorney General weren't really excited about any changes in the drug laws. The misprision of a felony statute, revising that so that it doesn't really apply to probation and parole agents. That was a huge lift, and while there's some negative aspects of not having prelims for Class 1 misdemeanors, we joined 43 other states in the nation that don't have Class 1 misdemeanor prelims. A reporter from the Argus called me at some point. Well, he called me 12 times on that issue, but at some point in those conversations, he said, "I just talked to a defense attorney from Omaha that said if they had to have Class 1 misdemeanor prelims, it would cripple the system." Now, it wasn't crippling the system in South Dakota, and I understand there's some negative aspects to it, but I've also had some very honest and frank conversations with some of my friends who are expert defense attorneys, and they admit to me that if I really need to get somebody out of jail and can't use a prelim, I have other means. And if I really need to get before the judge on a motion for something, I have other means. Was it easier, or did it work better in certain kinds of cases with prelims? They'd say yes, and I'd say yes. I understand that. We're tracking, because the defense attorneys really urged us to track data on prelims. We're tracking that, and just like every other issue in here, I think it's one of those issues that could be on the table in the next year or 2 or 3 if there's a certain group. I hear from some folks, mostly defense attorneys, who say, boy, in domestic violence cases, we should have prelims. Well, we tried to float that boat as we were trying to settle this big deal, and the victim advocates were crazy about that. I mean, they were like, are you kidding me? You want to just take the domestic violence victims and make them sit through a prelim? What about everybody else? And so, we've been through those discussions. We're willing to go through them again, and we're willing to evaluate the data and see what it looks like. If we end up with 200 more jury trials every year and people sitting in county jail and we have the data to show that's why, certainly folks are going to take a close look at that. Sustainability policies, I'll try to run through most of these quick so we can open it up to questions. I've talked about the Oversight Council. I haven't talked about the 10-year fiscal impact statement for a couple months. During the legislative session, that was close to a nightmare this year. One of the things that this bill did was establish a requirement. Any change in the law that's going to have an impact on the jail or penitentiary population, for instance, if somebody rushes in with a great new idea to make possession of cocaine a Class 3 felony, they have to get a fiscal impact statement. And that was very controversial in the early part of the legislative session because the Legislative Research Council didn't really develop a process for that until December, January timeframe, and I think we've gotten through that. Now we have a very good process in place, and it's really designed just to get people to think a little bit about what they're doing. When I was a prosecutor, I was working on a case, I figured out, hey, we don't have possession with intent to distribute marijuana. We have possession with intent to distribute controlled substances. So I got a whole Larry Law, and I got with the DCI, we ran it here, we testified, we got a new law on the books, increasing the penalty for possession with intent to distribute marijuana. I promise you, there was nobody in that room when we did that day that ever thought about, is this worth the cost? If we do this, is it worth the blank check, whatever the check is, whatever the amount? And that's all this is designed to do. It's not designed to stop changes in the law. If there's an area that we need to address, we should know what it's going to cost. Is it going to require us to build a new prison? This also applies to initiatives, initiated measures. You'll remember the Jail for Judges. Most of us were around during the Jail for Judges initiative, an out-of-state group that decided we should hold our judges accountable and put them in jail when they misbehave. Well, in Oregon a couple of years ago, an initiated measure was passed that was going to add like 8,000 people to the prison system that they didn't have before this initiated measure. If we have a group, and that was an outside group that came in and got that initiative passed, if a group comes in like that in South Dakota, that's on the books, trying to address that so we know the cost. Greg talked a lot about training. There have been hundreds of training sessions for DSS providers, people that are providing treatment, judges, probation, parole, and finally, improving efficiency. Talked about preliminary hearings. I hope I never have to talk about that again. And then the reinvestment structure for counties. We put $1 million in a kitty, and at the end of this fiscal year, we already know what each county's baseline for probation was. I'll use Eden County in Huron. Let's say going into this reform, they had 100 people on probation and they were growing at a rate of 3%. There's a 5-line trend line that was a 5-year trend line that was established, so we can see what their probation should have been without Senate Bill 70. If they're above that trend line, this $1 million is there to give them $1,000 per probationer above that trend line, and then a small stipend like $200 per probationer above the trend line for counties that don't have a jail because they have to transport people. The data shows that only about 8% of probationers do jail time in Pennington County, and that data stretches back about 5 years. We know that not every county is like Pennington County, but Pennington County was the only county that came forward and said, our jail keeps incredible data. We know how many probationers are here, how long they're here, what they're here for, how many jail days they do. So we used a lot of the data on policies like this. Here's the anticipated impact. I can tell you that there were lots of economists and scientists and researchers that calculated this impact. This wasn't something that Greg and I sat down and dreamt up and said, well, if this all works. They have a model that they've used around the country, and they plug all these policies in, and this is what they come up with. It's designed to save the state about $200 million over the next 10 years. Our population was expected to grow 25% over the next 10 years. I think Greg and I would be the first to admit that we really don't have any idea yet how this is going to work. Are the judges going to buy in? Are the parole agents all going to buy in? Are they going to do the kind of supervision we need them to do? Remember, I started talking early on about we want those caseloads to come down, and the reason for that is we want to focus more attention on the people that really need to be supervised because they're the most likely to reoffend. If that works, we think we can hold the growth about steady for 10 years. It's going to require some investment. The net is about 160 to 170 million, depending on what the reinvestment is. My friends at UJS, as we need to continue to expand drug courts, of course, they need more people and more money to do that, and I understand that. And so I think there's some competition, or at least some wrestling that goes on there, and we enjoy it, and very thankful for how hard they're all working on this. And with that, I think we both be willing to take just about any question you have. If they're too hard, I've got an appointment back in Pier. Any of you want?
Yeah, great. Is there any listing of how the probation officers do the risk factors, low, medium, and high? I'm starting to see them in the pre-sentences now, but how do they arrive at those numbers?
It's not a dartboard?
No, that's not evidence-based. So the LSIR, it's an instrument. It's essentially a question. Might be 21 questions that's administered. They're all trained on it, how to get it, and essentially it just gives you a raw score. And what that score means, the probation officer would have a scale score. that never was provided to the judges before Senate Bill 70. And we showed up at the worker hearings and the judges started to hear about this LSI score. Because that score, it is not a sentencing score. It's not a score that if you're a prosecutor or if you're a defense attorney, you shouldn't go into court and say, Judge, my guy's a 21. That should mean nothing to the judge, and I'd be really scared if you used it that way. Because it's really meant to be, this is the risk of the person reoffending on probation. It's a community supervision tool. But we have, and this might be something that'd be good to put on our website, but we have, it's a range. I know over 30 is high. I don't know, I've never taken one. Either court ordered or not court ordered. And so I don't know, but I know it creates a graph, and those all now go into pre-sentence reports to the judges. We had a big training in December, where we brought in Dr. Holzinger, who expert in the field, and explained to the judges, we're going to give this to you, understand what it is, understand what that score means. I've had a chance to visit with a lot of state court administrators in other states, and we talk about issues that they've faced, Kansas in particular. So in Kansas, state's attorneys started going in court and saying, Judge, this is a 28. You haven't seen a 28 in at least 2 weeks that I've been working with you. This is the highest guy we've got. You've got to put him in the penitentiary. And they were using that score as almost an aggravating circumstance. And on the other spectrum, a defense attorney would say, there's one thing I know about that. Sex offenders almost always show up with the very lowest category. And a lot of times then the court service officer, the chief will override that score and say, no, that's not the level of supervision for this person. And so I'm the soft-spoken one of the group. I'm proud of that. And so there's a lot of danger in that score, and we've intentionally kind of kept it close to the vest. But if people want more information on that, it's a tool that's used in a lot of states. This isn't a South Dakota version of anything. This is a national test, and I bet there's a ton of information. That's something that makes sense to put on the website so people understand.
Like you could have access to the actual questions. Because you said it's not really a sentencing thing.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, because I've seen that confusion in my sentencings too. But it is a sentencing thing a little bit because the assessment itself determines what your graduating sanction is.
If you go on Google and type in LSIR, it'll tell you it stands for, because I'm an Army guy, of course I love acronyms. I also once in a while like to know what they mean. It stands for Level of Service Inventory Revised. Now when I first heard that, after I heard it in the first meeting about 40 times, I said, what in the world does that mean? Well, it's a risk and needs assessment. So it talks about your criminogenic needs and also your risk to reoffend, not necessarily your risk to society, but your risk to reoffend. And it's a nationally, I think internationally accepted tool, and each one in DOC and in UJS is validated where they come in and they test, the researchers and all those people that do data, they test it to see if it's actually working, if the CSOs are applying it correctly. So it's really not supposed to be, the sole thing that drives a sentence, but it's supposed to drive for CSO and for the judge, what does this person really need? I mean, if we're scared of them, if this shows that we're scared of them, they need to be locked up and we need them to be locked up. If they're addicted to something, how can we deal with that? If they need drug court, can we find a Judge Rappel out there who will put them in drug court? That kind of thing. She just walked in, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't know how much I can release with that, because every time we test someone, we have to pay the company $1. And so I think there may be some conflict issues associated with it, but I'll check into that and see what I can get out there, because I can appreciate how you want to know more about that, particularly as we use it with graduated sanctions and define what.
But I think you can find the questions on Google. I think there's a sample form out there. If you type in LSIR, it'll tell you what we're asking.
I don't want to take it for myself either, but I heard one other thing too. Off the Fourth Circuit, we just made note of Court Service Officer the other day that corrective thinking with a private contract with a local treatment facility is now going to be mandatory for all probationers. Do you know anything about that? Is that statewide?
I don't think it should be mandatory.
It shouldn't be mandatory. Any person convicted of a 5 or 6 controlled substance offense, those presumptive probation, we have to refer them to DSS. And so there's this referral process unless they go to the penitentiary. And so then they get a slot in this visa program, which I think may be the program you're talking about. It's not mandatory, but I can tell you if you were referred there, it's probably going to become a condition of sentence or probation.
Yeah,
I think it's a statewide thing.
but that's a visa. We don't have enough money to give that to everybody on probation. So if you're going to probation for a class 4 felony, I don't know how many go to probation for a class 3 felony, but I know some judges that might do it. You might not get that because we don't have the money. The money was poured into this pool for class 5s and 6s because that's where our drug and alcohol felonies tend to be, and we've never had evidence-based programming there before. The corrective thinking is part of that, but if your risk and needs assessment says you don't need that, I don't think DSS will be wasting money on that.